The ledger of Unit 42 is bound in cracked black oilskin, smelling faintly of cellar mold and old starch. Here, in the damp basement of the regional archive, the ceiling pipes sweat a steady, rhythmic drip onto the concrete floor. The sound of that drip is almost identical to the sound that occurs within the unit itself, once every 58 seconds, day and night, for 76 years. It is a soft, wet click at the back of the throat. The glossopharyngeal nerve fires, the larynx rises 3 centimeters, the epiglottis folds down like a tiny rubber trapdoor, and a single milliliter of warm, clear fluid is pushed down the esophagus. It is an act so small, so routine, that the unit will perform it over 40 million times without ever consciously choosing to. We track these small transactions not because they are grand, but because they are the quiet, relentless currency of survival. To understand the ledger, we must go back to the damp autumn of 1972, inside the basement of the University of Illinois Dental School. There, a man named Dr. Arthur Birch spent his afternoons sitting on a green vinyl stool under the hum of fluorescent tubes. His hands, smelling of peppermint soap and vulcanized rubber, adjusted a small chrome cup called a Lashley cup over the parotid gland of a quiet volunteer. Birch was not interested in the grand gestures of the human body, the racing pulse of fear, the deep lungfuls of mountain air. He wanted to measure the leaks. He sat with a stopwatch and a series of graduated glass pipettes, catching the clear, salty fluid as it seeped from the cheek wall. He found that even in a state of absolute rest, when the volunteer was staring blankly at a beige wall, the 3 pairs of major glands, the parotid, the submandibular, and the sublingual, secreted 75 milliliters of fluid every hour. Birch recorded these numbers in a marbled composition notebook, his fountain pen scratching against the cheap paper. He calculated that during a pleasant walk in the park, the flow rate increases. When the volunteer caught the scent of fried onions from a passing cart, the parotid gland alone would surge, dumping 3 milliliters of fluid into the mouth in under 60 seconds. But during deep, dreamless sleep, the production lines nearly shut down. The mouth becomes a still, drying basin, receiving only a fraction of a milliliter every hour. When Birch averaged these peaks and valleys over a standard 24-hour cycle, the daily total settled at approximately 1.2 liters. It is a modest volume, about the size of a standard glass carafe left on a restaurant table. But it is a carafe that is filled and emptied every single day, without fail, from the first wet cry in the delivery room to the final dry breath in the hospice. Let us take this daily carafe and stack it against the passage of time. If we follow Unit 42 through its 76 years of existence, the numbers lose their modesty and take on a quiet, terrifying mass. By age 10, the unit has produced 4,300 liters. By age 30, the volume has climbed to 13,000 liters. When the unit reaches the end of its ledger, the total volume of saliva secreted and quietly swallowed back down reaches 27,300 liters. This is not an abstract measurement. It is 7,200 gallons of warm, slightly viscous fluid. It is enough to fill a standard above-ground family swimming pool, 10 feet wide, 20 feet long, and 4 feet deep. The kind with a faded blue vinyl liner and a white plastic ladder resting against the metal rim. We can picture this pool sitting in the overgrown backyard of a modest brick ranch house in Munster, Indiana, during a hot, humid July afternoon in 1994. The cicadas are screaming in the silver maple trees, and the air smells of cut grass and gasoline. If you were to walk up the plastic steps of that pool and look over the edge, you would expect to see cool, chlorinated water reflecting the summer sky. Instead, you would find yourself looking at 27,000 liters of yourself. It is a vast, heavy body of warm, recycled fluid, shimmering under the sun. It is the liquid weight of every conversation you ever had, every secret you kept, every dry postage stamp you licked, and every nervous silence you swallowed during a job interview or a first date. The instinct of the unit is to recoil from this image. The human mind is designed to view itself as a solid, self-contained vessel, a temple of clay with clear, defined boundaries. We believe that we end where our skin meets the air. We treat our internal fluids as private, temporary agents that perform a duty and then disappear. But the ledger reveals a different structure. The pool in Munster, Indiana, is not a collection of waste. It is a disassembled liquid version of the unit itself. This fluid is not just water. It is a complex biological broth containing amylase, a digestive enzyme that begins the process of breaking starches into sugars. Mucin, a slippery glycoprotein that coats the throat. Histatins, which prevent fungal infections. And trace minerals like calcium and phosphate, dissolved directly from the unit's own teeth and redeposited in a continuous, restorative wash. To keep this pool from stagnating, the body must constantly consume it. Every milliliter swallowed is a milliliter reclaimed, filtered through the stomach wall, sent into the bloodstream, and delivered back to the salivary glands to be secreted once more. It is a closed-loop system of radical conservation. If the unit were to stop swallowing, if it decided to spit this fluid into a brass bucket rather than return it to the interior, the consequences would be swift and catastrophic. Within 8 hours, the blood volume would drop, the heart would begin to race, and the kidneys would shut down to preserve remaining moisture. Within 24 hours, the mouth would become a dry, cracked canyon of dry tissue. We can observe this dry state in the medical archives of 1981, in the case of a patient suffering from advanced Sjogren's syndrome, a condition where the body's immune system mistakenly attacks and destroys its own moisture-producing glands. The patient, a 62-year-old former schoolteacher named Margaret, described the sensation of living without her daily pool. She spoke of her tongue adhering to the roof of her mouth like dry leather on wool. She could not speak for more than 30 seconds without her lips sticking to her teeth with a tearing sound. Her teeth, deprived of the protective, mineral-rich wash of saliva, began to crumble at the gum line, dissolving under the mild acids of her ordinary meals. Without the constant self-consumption, Margaret was literally drying out, her body turning into a brittle, calcifying monument that could no longer interact with the world. This is the quiet turn of our biology. We spend our lives trying to keep things separate. We build fences around our yards. We paint sealants on our wooden decks. And we wash our hands to keep the outside world from getting in. We treat the self as a fort that must be defended against erosion. But our actual survival depends on the opposite principle. We survive because we are constantly eroding ourselves from the inside. We are a waterfall that drinks its own pool to keep from running dry. The boundary between the me and the not me is not a stone wall. It is a wet, moving curtain that we must continuously dissolve and swallow back down. In the winter of 1998, Unit 42 sat in a green vinyl armchair in a suburban living room, watching the snow fall against the window pane. The house was room temperature, save for the rhythmic tick of a grandfather clock in the hallway. The unit was 82 years old now, his skin thin as parchment, his joints stiff with salt and calcium. He spent much of his time preserving things. He had wrapped his old journals in acid-free paper. He had placed small plastic caps over the legs of his dining chairs to protect the oak floor. He had even sprayed a protective silicone coating over his leather winter boots to keep the salt water from ruining them. He wanted, more than anything, to keep things exactly as they were. He wanted to halt the slow, messy decay of time. Yet, as he sat there in the silent room, his throat made that familiar wet click. The glossopharyngeal nerve fired, the larynx rose, and he swallowed. He did not notice it. He was thinking about the draft coming from the window, or the fuel bill, or the faded photograph of his wife on the mantelpiece. But in that single involuntary motion, he had just reclaimed another milliliter of his own life. He had dissolved a fraction of his own tissue, mixed it with the minerals of his bones, and sent it back into the warm, dark current of his interior. He was, in that moment, both the consumer and the consumed. He was keeping himself soft, keeping himself wet, keeping himself alive by refusing to stay solid. The mistake we make is believing that to endure, we must remain unbroken. We look at the mountains or the stone statues in the park, and we think that is what strength looks like. But stone does not have a pump. Stone cannot drink itself. The stone eventually turns to dust under the wind, and once it is dust, it cannot be put back together. The human unit, however, has the pool. We survive because we are willing to dissolve our own boundaries every 60 seconds, to take the very fluid that guards our gateway and pull it back into the dark center of our being. We are not a monument. We are a continuous, self-consuming process, a circle of water that never stops falling. The ledger in the basement archive eventually ends. The last entry for Unit 42 is marked with a simple red stamp. Service concluded. The final swallow was not recorded by a machine or a doctor with a chrome cup. It was simply the last click of a throat in a quiet room, a tiny wet door closing for the very last time, leaving the remaining fluid to dry quietly into the salt of the earth. The ledger is closed, the oilskin cover is wiped clean, and the file is returned to the steel drawer. The basement remains damp, the pipes continue to sweat, and outside, in the warm, dark grass, the cicadas continue their endless, vibrating hum.